in the Bay Area in 1 week because I was here for Cal student orientation last weekend. Go Bears! I have some Berkeley alums in the audience, hopefully. So how many of you came from outside the Bay Area to be here? Seeing a lot of raised hands. Okay, myself included, coming from Seattle, Washington, which is an absolutely lovely place. Oh yeah? So 425 represent, or the 206, depending on what specific area you're from. Just maybe a little more detail than necessary. So stand up if you are from Europe. Came in from Europe. Or raise your hand if you're not feeling the leg thing. Awesome, okay. Stand up or raise your hand if you are from Asia. Okay, seeing a lot of raised hands. Do we have anyone here from Africa? Whoa, that's awesome. Australia? Dang. And South America? Wow, this is really global. Is there anywhere I'm forgetting?
Canada.
Okay, Canada. I didn't realize Canada was its own continent. I mean, it's basically America, but with Tim Hortons, right? I just alienated an entire. I'm so sorry. That is the meanest thing I've ever said on another country. I actually love Canada. I had aspirations when I was a younger person of being Canadian and being able to take advantage of universal health care. So I'm coming here today because I do come from the perspective of a slightly younger person, or at least I hope to, because even though I was 12 years old when I gave that TED Talk, What Adults Can Learn from Kids, I think that many of the same messages that I delivered in that 8-minute talk remain true today. What I spoke about that year was really about how young people's audacity and creativity and impulsive nature can be true positives when we look at them that way, especially in the context of how we lead, how we parent, how we teach, and how we interact with others in society. Thinking about this from the perspective of someone who's going to be going to university next year, who will be at some point hopefully entering the workforce, I definitely had more thoughts about this. So I wanted to start with a story about a kid named Tyler. And he wrote on his blog that when he was 6 years old, he felt extremely depressed. He had to be dragged kicking and screaming to school. And he said, this is maybe a little bit of the 6-year-old pathos coming through, that he found life meaningless until long breaks rolled around. And during those long breaks, that was when magic happened. Because with that time off, he could play engineer. He would design tools made out of boxes and strings. And the other thing he loved was the computer. He writes, I remember with particular excitement this one night when my family upgraded to, wait for it, Windows 98. Sorry, Google. In 7th grade, a teacher asked his class what each person would do if they were given $1 million. And he wrote his essay not about getting the Lamborghini or building a library, but improving tech education. Today, that 6-year-old who had to be forced down the school halls crying is an immensely successful 20-something, 22 I think. And he's successful in my definition of the word, probably his as well, because what he's doing is directing a nonprofit called Student R&D, Research and Development, that organizes hackathons called Code Day in cities around the United States and hopefully at some point the world. He wrote a blog post about working in the nonprofit world called Why I Do What I Do. And he said that a lot of people asked him in a very skeptical voice, well, are you happy with this? You're not like making that much money. What's the deal, man? And he said that this job, even though it makes him neither rich nor famous, that he finds tremendous worth because the worth isn't about the salary, it isn't about the name. It's about the fact that he's doing exactly what he wanted to be doing when he was in 7th grade. He's doing exactly what he wanted to be doing if he had $1 million. And that's when it becomes clear why he doesn't care about what he makes, because he's already doing what he'd be doing if he were rich. And I read his blog post and I thought, wow, I think that's the kind of life that we all want to have. I'm not telling this story to convey any deep message about money or how we need a paradigm shift as to how we look at success or whatever else, though those may all be true, but I think we've all heard paradigm shift way too damn much. I'm saying this story because Tyler is someone who never forgot who he was when he was in 1st grade. And he never forgot who he was in 7th grade, and I think that doing both of those things is extremely easy. Maybe because we try to erase traumas, but in general, I think that there are significant benefits to all of us doing the same, remembering who we were as kids and trying to bring some of that back. You see, being the kid in the room means doing all those things that life coaches and motivational speakers will drum into your head about being spontaneous and doing what makes you happy, and having less inhibition and more humility. When you stay childish, you bring the party, and you learn from everyone, and you care less about collecting business cards and rather more about who's fun and who's interesting. If you've ever seen a bunch of kids on a playground, they're not doing a whole lot of what do you do. It's more like, can you climb those monkey bars or swing on the monkey bars? It's not just about fun though. On a more serious note, being the kid in the room means challenging groupthink in places like this, in companies, but also in the world outside in our communities. So the question is, how to think like a kid within a big company? Well, the very easiest thing to do is talk to us. Whether that means talking to your kids if you have them, talking to someone else's kids. Generally do not approach them on the street with candy, that doesn't look good. But incorporate us into your decision-making process. That could mean a youth advisory board. It could mean checking how a group of students in a certain grade respond to a new launch, whatever else. Treat interns as more than the people who get you coffee. One of the words that is most often used to describe young people, particularly under the age of 4, is disruptive. And I think that that's what many established systems need. Disruption is necessary for survival. I think that everyone in this area knows that. In one of my favorite opinion pieces ever, Why Elites Fail in the Nation, there's this one line that particularly stood out. And it talked about the urgency of conventional systems taking note of young people. It was this anthropologist, Karen Ho, and she described how in her research on Wall Street that Morgan Stanley recruiters would say to the recruits, "You will be working with the brightest people in the world. These are the greatest minds of the century." Robert Hopkins, the vice president of mergers and acquisitions at Lehman Brothers, said of those who inhabit Wall Street, "We are talking about the smartest people in the world. We are the smartest people in the world." Now, aside from the fact that saying that makes you sound like a complete douche, actually that's all you really need. But I was thinking about this, and coming to this area, I'm going to be going to Cal, and I know that a lot of you may have been in this area for a while or gone to Stanford, gone to Cal, talked to people who are coming from some of the most awesome universities in the world, work here. It's very easy to think, and honestly it's probably true, that these are the smartest people in the world. But any conference, board meeting, or heck, even a family dinner has failed if you are comfortable with everything, if you 100% believe that everything you are saying is right by virtue of that smartness, because that makes you complacent. And sometimes it takes kids or people who think like kids to walk into a room and point out the really obvious things, to ask the hard questions, to say the things that everyone else has overlooked because they're too worried about being offensive. And obviously there are some areas where that doesn't fly as well, but I think that in general we need that kind of bluntness and that challenge to groupthink. I experienced it firsthand because I organized a conference called TEDx Redmond. So those of you who are familiar with the TED conference know that the TEDx events are independently organized versions. And TEDx Redmond involved working with a committee of all youth, including a lot who were younger than me, and juggling school vacations and everyone's different commitments. The speakers were all under 20 years old, as was the majority of our audience. Last year, that audience numbered 1,000 people. And I'm very pleased to mention that our committee used a ton of Google products, lots and lots of Google Docs for collaboration. I mentioned this at other conferences a lot. You can thank me for the free advertising later. And I thought about this and I realized that sales and marketing and all the rest can be about so much more than getting a product or a site or whatever from point A to point B. It's also about telling the story of what happens after point B. Because I look at something like TEDx Redmond and I realize that that wasn't just the product of a bunch of smart teenagers in a room working on something, it was really the product of many, many, many smart people making products for us that we then used. And what I loved about my experience with organizing TEDx Redmond for 4 years, it was kind of my baby in high school and an immense time suck, but the greatest kind, was that it was a place where young people could get up on a stage and tell their real story. Not the story that their parents expected or their teachers expected, but the type of story that they wanted to share as a reflection of their authentic selves. So we heard talks like how World of Warcraft saved me in my education. We heard talks on illegal immigration and surrealist photography. And I'm not sure what central place there would have been for those kinds of insights had we not decided to gather in a room every year in September. I'm so glad that various companies believed in a ragtag bunch of kids to not ruin a conference center, and they actually put money behind the conference. There are countless examples that fill this region of young people founding companies and solving problems. And as people like me enter college and graduate and begin looking for jobs, we want to be parts of projects and companies and cultures that we're excited about. When we aren't able to get that from status quo opportunities, then we strike out on our own to create what we want. I think that if there are a couple words that describe young people today, it's impatient and visionary, ready to make our mark. This impatience and this visionary spirit can all be assets to companies, if you are willing to make room, to listen, and to believe. If you want to shift the disruptive mindset of the most interconnected generation in history into your organization, then you have to work less like an organization and more like an organism, like a living, breathing, responsive place where people are free not to work their way up through a system, not to work their way up through a structure, but immediately be part of this living system. Your ability to harness this youth talent is especially advantageous and critical here, where youth talent makes up such a big part of the lifeblood of the economy. And around the world, young people have more than $819 billion in spending power, according to one MasterCard stat. But our power is truly more than economic. I think that's a very shallow, surface-level way to look at young people just through the lens of our spending power. I think that our power is social. It's about inspiring new ways of thinking. It's about ways of thinking that can have implications if they permeate everywhere, from Google to the nonprofit world, education. So where do the aspirations and expectations of young people for living systems and for change and paradigm shifts run into or intersect with existing organizations that are run by adults? Well, if you take a look at Code for America, which matches young people with programming expertise with city governments to build apps and make websites better, then you see how young people can help at a community level very powerfully. Then there's someone I know, 17-year-old Jaisal Patel, and he started an organization called NGO Technologies. And he was basically just like, if you're a nonprofit doing cool work, hit me up, I will make you a website, I will develop technologies for you, whatever. So he implemented a biogas energy project, he built information technology infrastructure for an organization supporting Indian cloth weavers, and he developed a website for a nonprofit fighting human rights abuses, and this was just all in his free time as a full-time high school student. Think about how many teenagers like Jaisal might be waiting in classrooms, just waiting for that chance to serve. Coming of age in a digital world, I truly think that young people like me are redefining ourselves. We are not stock characters in a storybook, either the victims in distress waiting to be rescued when the grown-ups arrive, or the oft-villainized slacktivists, where all we do is click like on causes but do nothing more. Our world is no fairy tale. And yet perhaps one of the most precious things, the one thing I hope you walk away with about kids, if anything, is that people my age, even as we break free from the dichotomous assumptions about who we are as characters within this global story, we strive for the same ending. You see, in all the naivete or hope of my youth, I want to believe, no matter how great the conflicts or how vicious the problems, that our story will end with the same oft-heard line as so many childhood tales, and so they all lived happily ever after. Thank you so much.
Let's take a seat here, or we'll hear from our other two guests, and I know you have to leave for a plane, so thank you very much.